We don't negotiate with murderers. Part 1. The summit at the edge of stars. The Galactic Conclave Station hung in the dark void above a dying red star. It was the largest neutral meeting place in the known galaxy, a great ring-shaped structure built by 14 species working together over 300 years ago. Wars had ended here. Treaties had been signed here. Civilizations that had tried to destroy each other had sat across the same table and learned to be quiet instead. And the station had seen all of it, and the species that ran it were very proud of that record. But on this particular day, something was coming that the station had never seen before. Ambassador Mara Voss stepped off the human transport ship and into the long silver corridor of the docking bay without any ceremony at all. She carried no grand escort. She brought no parade of soldiers or colorful banners. She walked in with 2 junior aides behind her, a small carry case over her left shoulder, and nothing else. She was not what most alien diplomats expected when they pictured a human representative. She was not particularly tall. Her dark uniform was plain except for the silver emblem of Earth's diplomatic corps on the chest. Her hair was pulled tight against the back of her head, and her face was calm the way deep water is calm. Not because nothing was happening underneath, but because the surface simply refused to show it. She had spent 22 years in the human navy before becoming a diplomat, and another 15 years after that negotiating trade lines and border agreements in the outer reaches of human space. She was 61 years old, and she walked like someone who had already decided how the day was going to end. A small Aelorian station attendant with pale blue skin and wide golden eyes hurried forward to greet her. The Aelorians were one of the oldest species in the conclave, graceful, long-lived, and deeply proud of their centuries of wisdom and patience. This particular attendant bowed with 2 of his 4 arms and addressed her in the common galactic tongue that all official delegates were required to use. Ambassador Voss, welcome to the Conclave Station. We are honored by Earth's presence at the Grand Summit. Your delegation suite has been prepared on Level 7. The summit session opens in 3 hours. And all senior delegates are gathering now in the Western Reception Hall for the pre-session introduction ceremony. Thank you, Mara said. Please cancel our attendance at the reception. We will arrive directly at the chamber when the session opens. The attendant blinked slowly with all 3 of his eyelids. Of course, Ambassador, as you wish. As Mara and her aides moved through the main corridor, her younger aide, Corporal Dean, kept his voice low and read from his datapad. The Dean was 30 years old with a serious face and the habit of reporting information in clean, fast sentences. The Voth delegation arrived 6 hours ahead of us, he said. 14 members total. Grand Vorath himself is leading their team. He brought 3 honor guards inside the station, which is technically within the summit rules. There are also 9 Voth warships sitting just outside the neutral zone boundary, all facing inward. 9, Mara said. And not as a question, but as a number she was filing somewhere in the back of her mind for later. The official pre-session documents from the Council refer to all 3 colony ship attacks as navigational incidents in contested border space, Dean continued, his voice careful and even. They are not using the word attack anywhere in the official written record. The word they keep using is incident. Mara did not slow her pace. She did not react. She kept walking. But the station was impressive even by galactic standards. Its great halls were carved from dark asteroid stone and filled with the low, constant hum of atmospheric processors that kept 14 different types of breathable air separated across different zones. The walls were covered in long murals showing the history of every species that had ever joined the conclave, their founding ambassadors, their first contact moments, the long record of their civilization stretching back millions of years in some cases. Humanity's mural was small. It had only been added 40 years ago, and it sat near the end of one corridor, easy to walk past without noticing. It showed the first human ship to make contact with Aelorian scouts, a modest explorer called the UHCS Franklin, crewed by 11 people who had no clear idea what they were flying toward. In the mural, the humans looked young and a little uncertain, which was more or less how the rest of the conclave had always seen humanity: young, fragile, too new to the stars to be taken completely seriously. Mara stopped in front of the mural for a moment. She looked at those 11 painted faces. Then she walked on. The Western reception hall was loud and bright, with the noise of 1,000 years of galactic politics doing what it always did. Delegates from a dozen worlds moved through the space in clusters. Tall, silver-robed Veth diplomats speaking in low tones, the clicking Kreth in their sealed atmosphere suits, the enormous, slow-moving Galdarans whose every footstep sent a small tremor through the floor. And in the far corner, surrounded by his honor guards and speaking with 2 council elders, stood Grand Vorath of the Voth Dominion. He was exactly as the intelligence files described, massive and scaled, with a long, angular face and eyes set wide apart like something built for hunting. He wore deep red ceremonial armor and held a command staff that was mostly decorative but still unmistakably a weapon. He was laughing at something one of the elders said, a deep rolling sound that filled the corner of the room he stood in. His eyes swept the open doorway as Mara passed. For just a moment, the two of them looked directly at each other. He smiled, slow and deliberate, the smile of someone who had already counted his winnings. Mara looked back at him, the way a person looks at a calculation they have already finished. Then she kept walking, without changing her pace at all. In their suite on level 7, Mara sat at the plain table and opened a small sealed document case. Inside was a single printed card and a thin data chip. The card was handwritten in actual ink on actual paper, which was unusual enough that Dean stared at it for a moment. "Oh, what is that?" he asked quietly. "A letter from the families," she said. She did not explain further. She placed the card flat on the table and looked at it for a long moment without touching it again. Dean understood without needing to be told. The families, the 40,000 families of the men, women, and children killed aboard the UHCS Endurance, the UHCS New Carthage, and the UHCS Meridian Star. 3 colony ships. 3 separate attacks spread over 10 years. Farmers, teachers, the engineers, young couples with small children, people who had packed everything they owned into transport vessels and pointed themselves at a new world full of open land and clean air and the possibility of a better life. None of them had ever arrived. The Voth had fired on all 3 ships. The Conclave had investigated twice, and both times declared the events to be the result of navigation disputes in border regions. Earth had filed formal protests. Earth had sent written complaints and official requests for hearings and detailed casualty records. Earth had asked and waited and asked again, and for 10 years, the galaxy had continued to tell humanity to be patient. Mara closed the document case carefully. "Get some rest," she told Dean. 3 hours goes fast." She stood at the window and looked out at the dying red star that glowed slow and heavy below the station. And it had been burning that way for 10,000 years, losing itself bit by bit into the dark, shedding its outer layers in long, quiet ribbons of light that drifted away and disappeared. It did not mourn what it was losing. It simply burned, because burning was what it was made to do. Mara pulled on her uniform jacket and checked the collar once in the mirror by the door. Outside in the corridor, the station hummed with the sound of 1,000 worlds going about their business, trading and arguing and negotiating and doing all the things that powerful civilizations do when they believe the order of things is settled and permanent. In 3 hours, Mara Voss was going to walk into the middle of all that certainty. And she was going to say something that none of them would ever forget. We don't negotiate with murderers. Part 2. The weight of human memory. The Grand Council Chamber was the largest room on the conclave station, and it had been designed to make everyone inside it feel the weight of history. The ceiling was high and dark like the space outside. The walls curved inward in a wide circle, and around that circle sat the delegate platforms of all 14 conclave species, and each one slightly raised and angled toward the center floor where the speaking platform stood. The chamber could hold over 300 delegates and observers, and on this day every seat was full. The session had been called to order by Patriarch Sul of the Aelorian species. He was very old, nearly 900 years old by human counting, and he carried that age the way mountains carry height, slowly and without apology. He had silver-white skin and 4 long arms that folded neatly in front of him, and his voice was low and measured in the way of someone who had spoken in important rooms for so long that urgency no longer felt necessary. This grand summit convenes to resolve the navigational dispute between the Voth Dominion and the human colonial administration of the Outer Reach territories, he said, reading from the official record. Both parties are present. The Council recognizes the Voth Dominion's delegation first as the senior conclave member in this dispute. Grand Vorath rose from the Voth platform. He was dressed in full ceremonial armor now, red and gold, and he spoke with the easy confidence of someone who had done this before and always walked out of the room with what he wanted. He spoke for 12 minutes. Then he described 3 separate navigation incidents in which Voth warships had encountered unregistered vessels in contested border space and had followed standard Dominion military protocol. He expressed in broad diplomatic language that the Voth Dominion deeply regretted any loss of life that had resulted from these encounters, while also noting clearly that the ships in question had not been properly registered through conclave border channels at the time of each incident. He sat down. Patriarch Sul turned to the human delegation platform. The Council now recognizes Ambassador Mara Voss of the Human Commonwealth. Mara stood up. She did not walk to the speaking platform right away. She stood at her delegation table for a moment and opened the carry case she had brought with her. She removed a small flat device, a standard holographic projector, and placed it on the table in front of her. Then she walked to the center floor, leaving the projector behind. "Thank you, Patriarch," she said. Her voice was quiet, but the acoustics of the chamber carried it perfectly to every corner. "Before I respond to anything the Voth Dominion has said, I would like to show this council something." She looked back at the device on her table. Corporal Dean activated it from the delegation platform. The lights in the chamber did not dim. There was no dramatic presentation. The holographic image simply appeared in the center of the room, large, clear, and completely unedited. It was footage from inside the UHCS Endurance. The image was shaky because it had been taken from an emergency recording system, the kind that activated automatically when a ship's hull integrity was compromised. The corridor in the recording was filled with smoke and the stuttering orange light of emergency strips on the floor. People were running. Men and women in civilian clothes, some of them carrying children, some of them pulling injured people by the arms. So a woman fell and someone picked her up without stopping. A door at the far end of the corridor blew inward and the recording shook hard. Then the camera angle shifted to an exterior view, a recording from a hull-mounted emergency beacon that had survived and transmitted its data before the ship broke apart. The Endurance was visible from outside now, a long colony transport vessel venting atmosphere from 3 separate hull breaches. And clearly visible alongside her, close enough that their weapon ports were unmistakable, were 2 Voth warships. They were firing at the escape pods, not at the ship. The ship was already dying. They were targeting the small round emergency pods that were separating from the hull and trying to move away. The recording was perfectly clear. There was no ambiguity in it, and there was no way to describe what it showed as anything other than what it was. Mara let it play. She stood on the speaking platform with her hands at her sides, and she let the recording play at full volume. The alarms, the distant sound of impact, a child crying somewhere near the recording device, and then the long, terrible silence that followed the last explosion. The chamber was absolutely still. Patriarch Sewell had not moved since the footage began. His bioluminescent skin, which normally glowed a soft, warm gold when he was comfortable, had gone completely dim. On the Kreth delegate platform, the insectoid ambassadors had stopped their constant background clicking entirely, which for a Kreth was the equivalent of holding their breath. Several of the younger delegates from smaller species had turned away from the hologram. Grand Vorath had not turned away. He stared straight ahead with his wide predator eyes, and he did not change his expression at all. The footage ran for 4 minutes and 7 seconds. When it ended, Mara let the silence sit for another full minute before she spoke again. "That recording is from the UHCS Endurance," she said. 40 years ago, this council might have called what you just watched a navigational incident. 20 years ago, this council did call it that, twice, in 2 separate official rulings." She paused for only a second. "Why, I want to say clearly and for the permanent record of this conclave that the people of Earth do not accept that language and have never accepted it." She reached into the inner pocket of her uniform jacket and removed a folded document. She unfolded it slowly and held it up so the chamber could see that it was covered in dense printed text and signatures. Thousands of signatures, compressed into tiny print across multiple pages that had been folded together. "Oh, this document is called the Voss Declaration," she said. "It carries the co-signature of every registered adult citizen of the human commonwealth and every colony governor in human space. Over 12 billion signatures. It represents the formal and unified position of humanity on this matter." She placed it flat on the speaking platform. "It contains 2 sentences," she said. Patriarch Sewell leaned forward slowly. "Ambassador, may I ask what those sentences say before you read them into the record?" "You may not," Mara said, gently, but without any softness in it. "The record will hear them when I am ready to read them. Right now I am asking this council to sit with what they just watched for a little while longer." She stepped back from the platform and returned to her delegation table and sat down. The chamber stayed silent. On the far side of the room, and a young Aelorian aide sitting behind the council elder section leaned very slowly toward the colleague sitting next to him. His voice was barely a breath. "Do they not understand how a war with the Voth Dominion ends?" he whispered. His colleague did not answer right away. He was still looking at the empty space where the hologram had been, at the place where the escape pods had been burning just moments before. "I don't think that is what frightens them right now," the colleague whispered back. "We don't negotiate with murderers." Part 3. The address Patriarch Sewell called for a recess 15 minutes after the footage ended. Mara did not move from the speaking platform. Sewell looked at her from the council arc with an expression that was difficult to read on an Aelorian face, something between patience and quiet alarm. "Ambassador Voss, a short recess would allow all delegates to—" "I would prefer to continue," Mara said. "The session protocol allows for—" "I am aware of the protocol," she said. "I would still prefer to continue." The chamber murmured. Several delegates exchanged looks across the wide circular space. Grand Vorath crossed one large arm over the other and watched with the focused stillness of a predator that had decided the mouse in front of it was performing something mildly interesting. Patriarch Sewell sat back in his chair and gestured with 2 of his 4 arms for the session to proceed. Mara placed both hands flat on the surface of the speaking platform and looked out at the chamber, at all of it. Every species, every delegate, every face turned toward her. The session was being broadcast live on the Conclave's public record channel, which meant it was going out to receiving stations across 2,000 inhabited worlds. She knew that. And she had made sure of it before she came in. She began to speak. She did not speak about anger. She did not raise her voice or make dramatic gestures or appeal to anyone's emotions. She spoke in the same quiet, steady tone she had used since she arrived on the station, calm the way a river is calm when it is moving fast and deep and has a long way to go. She talked about patience. Humanity has been in space for 200 years, she said. By the standards of this conclave, we are children. Many of you have told us so in meetings like this one, and in private conversations, and in the way you speak about our civilization when you believe we are not listening. And for 200 years, we have been patient with that assessment because we understood that patience was what the galaxy expected from the new arrivals. She paused. But patience is not the same thing as forgetting. Humans. This council does not yet fully understand this. Humans do not forget. She reached down to the speaking platform and activated the data chip she had placed there before the session began. A long list appeared in the holographic display above the center of the chamber. Names. Thousands of names, displayed in clean white letters against a dark background, arranged in columns that filled the entire projection space. These are the 40,312 people who were killed in the 3 attacks carried out by Voth Dominion warships on human colony vessels, she said. I am going to read them into the permanent record of this conclave now. Every name, every age, every homeworld. She started reading. She read steadily and without rushing. Every name was spoken clearly. When she came to a child's name, she read the age as well, quietly and without comment. She did not editorialize, and she did not pause for effect. She simply read, name after name after name, the way you read something that deserves to be said out loud because it was never said properly before. It took a very long time. No one in the chamber spoke. No one called for a recess again. The chamber, which had been full of the background noise of diplomacy, the shuffling of data pads and the low murmur of translation devices and the constant clicking of the creth, went completely quiet in a way that large rooms almost never do. When the last name had been read, Mara stood still for a moment. Then she looked directly at Grand Vorath. She had not looked at him directly during the name reading. She had faced the full chamber, speaking to all of it. But now she turned her eyes to the Voth platform and held them there, and her voice, when she spoke again, was so level and so clear that it felt less like speech and more like something being cut into stone. The humans of Earth and her colonies have a saying, she said. It is not a diplomatic saying. It did not come from politics or law or treaty negotiations. It came from our history. From thousands of years of conflict on a single overcrowded world. Where civilizations learned the hard way what happens when they reward violence with compromise. She let the chamber breathe for 1 second. We do not negotiate with murderers. We do not bargain with them. We do not offer them compensation for the time it took them to kill our people. We do not use the word incident where the word murder belongs. This is not a cultural preference. This is not a negotiating position. This is the only language our dead will allow us to speak. The chamber was absolutely still. Humanity formally withdraws from the mediation framework of this summit, she said, and her voice did not change at all. We will not participate in a process that asks us to treat the killing of 40,000 civilians as a matter for financial settlement. We are leaving this table. She picked up the Voss declaration from the speaking platform. And as of 6 hours ago, Earth's 6th Deep Space Fleet has been mobilized and is currently underway. The murmur that ran through the chamber was immediate and loud. 2 council elders stood up at the same time. The Veth delegates began speaking to each other in fast, urgent tones. Even the Galdarans, who normally required several minutes to process and react to information, shifted heavily in their seats. Grand Vorath laughed. It was the same deep rolling laugh from the reception hall, relaxed, unhurried, and carrying the absolute confidence of someone who had sat at this table many times and always understood how the numbers worked. He spread his arms wide in a gesture that said, clearly, that he welcomed the shift in tone. The human fleet, he said, speaking up from his platform without waiting to be recognized by the patriarch. "This is the fleet that numbers what? 400 warships? 500? He shook his large, angular head slowly. The Voth Dominion fields 4,000 warships along the border corridor alone, Ambassador. We have been spacefaring for 6,000 years. Your civilization has been reaching for the stars for 2 centuries. His smile was enormous and absolutely certain. "I do not say this to be cruel. I say it because this council deserves an honest picture. If the human commonwealth wishes to pursue a military response, then I strongly suggest that someone at this table who they trust tells them what that response will cost them before they make a decision they cannot undo." Mara was already picking up her coat from the delegation table. She listened to Vorath finish speaking without turning around. When he was done, she pulled on her coat and straightened the collar with both hands. Then she looked back at the Voth platform over her shoulder. "The way you might look back at something you passed on the road without slowing down?" "Yes," she said simply. "We know." She walked toward the exit. Behind her, the chamber erupted. "We don't negotiate with murderers." Part 4. What the Council Didn't Know About Humans. The emergency closed session began 40 minutes after Mara Voss walked out of the Grand Council chamber. Patriarch Sul called it himself. And he did not send the request through formal channels. He sent it through direct personal contact to every senior delegate, which was a thing he had done only twice in his 900-year diplomatic career, and both of those times a war had been about to start. The session room was smaller than the Grand Chamber. A round table, no elevated platforms, no public broadcast feed, no observers. Just the 14 senior species representatives sitting together in a plain room. And then for the first time in a very long while, none of them were entirely comfortable. The Veth elder, Counselor Arim, spoke first. She was 600 years old and known across the conclave for never raising her voice. She was raising it now, slightly, which for a Veth was the equivalent of standing on a table. "What exactly has the human fleet mobilized toward?" she demanded. "The 6th Deep Space Fleet left human space on a heading that our long-range monitors have not been able to establish clearly. We know the ships are moving. We do not know where they are going or in what formation. The Voth border corridor is 11 days of travel at standard military speed," said the Galdaran representative, slowly and heavily, each word landing like a dropped stone. "If the human ships left 6 hours ago, as the ambassador stated—" "That is not the problem," interrupted the Kreth representative, the clicks and buzzes of his speech being simultaneously translated by the table's built-in system. "The problem is what came through the back channels 40 minutes ago from Voth Dominion Military Command." The room went quiet. Patriarch Sul folded all 4 of his hands together and looked at the table. "Tell them," he said to the Kreth representative. The Voth military detected something in their own territory approximately 2 hours before this session began, the Kreth representative said. 312 unregistered objects were found inside Voth border space, not on the borders, not in contested zones, inside confirmed Voth territory, distributed across 17 star systems, including 4 that contain Voth military command infrastructure. The clicks and buzzes slowed down as the translator worked. The objects are armed orbital platforms, autonomous, already in position, already active. They have been there, based on the power readings the Voth are reporting, for between 8 and 18 months. Nobody spoke. The Veth elder stared at the table. The Galdaran made a low sound that its translator rendered as a single word. "Impossible!" The other delegates looked at each other with the particular expression of people who have just discovered that the ground under their feet is not as solid as they thought. 312 platforms, Patriarch Sul said very quietly. Inside Voth territory, without detection, for up to 18 months. The Voth are calling it an act of war, the Kreth representative said. The Voth, said Arim. The Veth elder, in a very measured tone, do not get to call anything an act of war right now. She paused. How did human ships pass through Voth sensor grids without detection for 18 months? Nobody had an answer to that. What they did not yet know, though they would piece it together over the following days, was how long it had actually taken Earth's Strategic Planning Division to build and deploy Project Pale Horse. The project had started not 6 months ago, not a year ago, but 4 years ago, in the quiet of a planning facility on the edge of the Martian plateau, in the aftermath of the Third Colony ship attack. 4 years of disguising autonomous platforms as natural debris, as asteroids, as drift ice, as dead satellite fragments, and threading them slowly, one at a time, over hundreds of separate routes through the edges of Voth sensor coverage. 4 years of waiting for each one to drift to its assigned position without triggering any alarm. And it had required patience on a scale that most species in the conclave would not have considered possible from a civilization as emotionally volatile as humanity was generally assumed to be. But that was the thing the conclave had never properly understood about humans. Yes, humans were emotional. Yes, they were quick to feel, quick to react, quick to get angry. But humans also came from a world where every civilization that had ever risen had done so in direct competition with every other civilization on the same small, resource-limited planet. Thousands of years of that kind of history produced something very specific, a deep, practical, survival-level understanding that feeling something and acting on it were two completely different things, and that the most dangerous move you could make was the one the other side was not prepared for. Humans got angry, and then, when it mattered, they got quiet, and they made a plan, and they waited. In the closed session room, Patriarch Sewell eventually stood up and asked the attendant to connect him to Ambassador Voss on a private channel. She answered immediately, as if she had been waiting for the call. "Ambassador," Sewell said, choosing his words with great care, "I want to speak plainly with you outside of the formal record." "I appreciate that," she said. "Which are you trying to destroy the Voth Dominion?" he asked. There was no accusation in the question, just the genuine and slightly frightened inquiry of a very old diplomat who needed to understand what he was dealing with. Mara was quiet for a moment. Not the quiet of someone thinking about how to answer, the quiet of someone deciding exactly how honest to be. "No," she said, "we are not trying to destroy them." Sewell let out a breath. "Then what? We want them to remember," she said. There is a difference between those two things, Patriarch. Destroyed civilizations don't carry lessons. They just disappear and eventually someone else makes the same mistake." Her voice stayed level and calm. "We want the Voth Dominion to exist for the next 10,000 years in full knowledge of what happened when they pointed their weapons at our escape pods. We want every Voth military commander who ever thinks about doing this to a human ship to remember exactly where we are capable of putting 300 armed platforms, inside their territory, inside their command zones, inside what they thought was safe space, without them ever knowing until we decided it was time to tell them." Sewell was quiet. "Your counsel?" Mara said, and her voice softened slightly. Not in weakness, but in something that sounded almost like sadness. "Never fully understood what you were asking us to forget, Patriarch. You kept offering us settlements and rulings and the word incident, and each time you did that, another 40,000 names got added to the list that we will never stop carrying." Sewell stayed quiet for a long time after the channel closed. At the other end of the station, in the Voth Dominion's private delegation suite, the Grand Vorath was looking at the same data his military command had sent. 312 platforms, already inside his borders, already armed, already waiting, and the expression on his large, angular face was something that had not been on it before. It was not anger. It was something much quieter than anger. And it was the first time in this whole summit that Grand Vorath understood clearly and completely that something had changed. and we don't negotiate with murderers. Part 5. The Pale Faces of the Council. 3 days passed. Mara Voss spent all 3 of them in the human delegation suite on level 7. She ate at the small table by the window. She read. She slept at regular hours. She answered Patriarch Sewell's 2 follow-up messages with brief, polite replies that said very little. She did not attend any of the informal sessions that the council quietly organized during those 3 days to try to find a way through the situation they now found themselves in. She did not make public statements. She did not brief the press channels that had picked up on the broadcast and were now running the story across every major news network in the galaxy. Corporal Dean brought her updates every morning. The Voth military had made no aggressive moves. The 9 warships outside the neutral zone had not advanced and had not withdrawn, which Dean noted carefully and which Mara noted in return with a small nod. The Council's own monitoring stations confirmed that Earth's 6th Deep Space Fleet was still underway but had made no aggressive maneuvers. And in the Voth Dominion itself, something interesting was happening. Grand Vorath had been recalled. The Voth Dominion's ruling body, the 12 commanders, who held collective authority over all major Dominion decisions, had sent a private transport to collect him on the 2nd day. He left the station without ceremony and without speaking to the press channels that had gathered near every docking bay entrance. The 9 warships outside the neutral zone moved to escort his transport, and then they kept going, back across the border, all 9 of them, without incident. On the 4th morning, a new Voth shuttle arrived at the station's docking bay. It came without any warship escort at all, which was the kind of detail that got noticed immediately by everyone on the station. A new Voth emissary disembarked, a younger official named Sub-Commander Vareth, who had a careful face and spoke in the common tongue without any of Vorath's theatrical weight. He went directly to the conclave reception desk and made a formal request. He was requesting a meeting with Ambassador Mara Voss. The reception attendant, the same small blue-skinned Aelorian who had greeted Mara 4 days earlier, carried the message personally to the Level 7 suite. He knocked on the door and delivered the request, and then stood in the corridor with his golden eyes a little wider than usual, waiting. Mara looked at the message card for a moment. "Tell him we will meet in the main council chamber," she said. "Us in 4 hours." The attendant bowed with 2 of his forearms and hurried away. 4 hours later, Mara walked into the Grand Council chamber. What she saw when she entered stopped her for just a fraction of a second, though she did not let it show in her face or her pace. The chamber was full, completely full, every delegate platform occupied, every observer seat taken. The council arc filled with senior representatives who had no official reason to be present for what had been described as a bilateral discussion between the human Commonwealth and the Voth Dominion. They had all come anyway. And as Mara crossed the threshold and walked toward the speaking platform at the center of the room, every single person in that chamber stood up. Not because protocol required it. A protocol did not require it. In the conclave's 800 years of recorded sessions, there was no standing procedure for the entrance of a bilateral delegate. They stood because they chose to, because somewhere in the 4 days since Mara had walked out of the chamber with her coat over her arm, every species in the conclave had had time to watch the recording of the Voss address, to read the analyses, to understand fully what they had seen and what it meant. Had they stood the way people stand for something they were not sure how to respond to, but could not sit still in front of. Mara walked to the center platform and waited for the chamber to settle. Sub-Commander Varath of the Voth Dominion came to the center floor from the other side. He was not in ceremonial armor. He wore a plain Voth administrative uniform, and he carried a single data pad. And he bowed his head slightly when he reached the platform, a gesture that had no formal diplomatic meaning in Voth culture, and therefore meant that he had chosen to make it on his own. "Ambassador Voss," he said, The Voth Dominion has sent me to speak clearly, and without the kind of language that has defined our previous interactions with the human commonwealth. Good, Mara said. Verath placed his datapad on the platform and read from it directly. Now, which was another unusual choice. Voth officials almost never read from prepared statements at conclave sessions, preferring to project an image of speaking from authority and memory. Reading from a datapad was an admission that someone had written these words down and reviewed them and decided they needed to be said exactly right. He read the full Voth Dominion acknowledgement. It named all 3 colony ship attacks by their official designations and used the word attack for each of them. It included a full accounting of the Voth military orders that had been issued on each occasion and the command chain responsible for each attack. It named the 40,312 dead as civilians who had been killed by Voth military action. It offered full reparations at a figure that had been negotiated in advance with the Human Commonwealth's legal office. And it included a territorial withdrawal from all disputed zones in the Outer Reach Corridor, a withdrawal that would give humanity clear, uncontested access to the colonial expansion paths that the Voth had been blocking for 30 years. Verath finished reading. He lowered the datapad. The Voth Dominion asks for the Human Commonwealth's acceptance of these terms and for the standing down of the 6th Fleet and all associated strategic deployments, he said. Amara looked at him for a moment. The Dominion's terms are accepted, she said. The fleet will stand down within 24 hours of the formal written agreement being signed and filed with the Conclave Permanent Record. She paused. I have one condition to add. Verath nodded carefully. These terms in full are to be inscribed into the Conclave's foundational legal record as binding precedent, she said. She turned slightly so her voice carried to the Council Arc as well as to Verath. And the word incident is to be formally struck from every official Conclave document that uses it to describe human casualties. Every document, going back 40 years. The Council Arc was quiet. Patriarch Sewell looked at her for a long moment. Then he said very simply, "The Council agrees." It was the fastest unanimous vote in conclave history. The formal signing happened in the same chamber an hour later. When it was done, Mara picked up her copy of the document, folded it carefully, and placed it in her inner pocket, next to the letter from the families that she had carried there since the first day. She did not say anything else in the chamber. She did not make a closing statement. She walked toward the exit with Corporal Dean at her side. Near the back of the observer section, a young Kreth journalist was operating a recording unit. The journalist had been there for the entire session and had captured everything. But the image that would travel across 2,000 worlds was not the signing. It was this last moment. It showed the Grand Council chamber of the Galactic Conclave. Full, every seat taken, 14 species representing billions of years of combined history and the oldest civilizations in the known galaxy. All of them watching in complete silence as a single human woman walked out of the room without looking back. The image ran everywhere, every channel, every network, every press feed from the core worlds to the outer colonial territories, and the caption that accompanied it, translated into 2,000 languages, said only this: they were sailing the stars before humans learned to walk upright, and yet they are afraid of her. Late that night, Mara sat alone at the window of the Level 7 suite. The dying red star below the station burned the same as it always had, slow and patient and very, very old. It had been doing this for 10,000 years and would keep doing it for 10,000 more, losing itself piece by piece into the dark without rush or regret. Dean knocked and came in with 2 cups of something hot. He sat across from her and they were both quiet for a while. "Do you think it will hold?" he asked finally. "The agreement." Mara thought about it honestly. "Long enough," she said. Dean nodded. He looked out at the star. "Why did they stand up when you walked in?" he asked. "Be all of them," There was no protocol for it. Mara wrapped both hands around her cup. Because they spent 4 days going back through 40 years of decisions, she said. And somewhere in the middle of all that, they realized that we had never asked them for anything they were not already required by their own laws to give us. She looked at the star. We never asked them for mercy. We never asked them for sympathy. We only ever asked them to do the thing they told us they existed to do, which was to say clearly out loud that killing civilians is not a navigational incident. She was quiet for a moment. When they finally did it, I think they stood up because they were embarrassed it took this long. Dean thought about that. Outside, the star kept burning. Humanity had not won because they were the largest civilization in the conclave, or the most ancient or the most powerful. And they had won because in a galaxy full of species that had learned to let old wounds close over and grow quiet, humans were different. Humans carried their dead with them. Every name, every face, every age, not as a burden, but as a promise. A promise that said clearly and without compromise that the people you lost were worth every uncomfortable moment it took to make sure they were never forgotten. In a galaxy that had learned to move on, humans had never learned to let go. And on this day, where at last the galaxy had finally understood what that meant.